boccia training or competitions? What motivates you to achieve? Why do you keep doing these things? And then the next question, do you take failure personally? So this question, it may vary, okay? Sometimes the failures may differ. Some failures you may take personally and other failures you don't take personally. And maybe you don't take failure personally at all. So what I mean by taking it personally is blaming yourself too much for a failure. So, oh, why did I do that? That was silly, for example, or I always do that. These kind of thought processes. Okay, so have a think about that one. Do I take failure personally? And then, do you avoid challenges due to fear of failure? So this could be small challenges, like maybe in your sport or your training, you might avoid stepping up a little bit because of fear of failure, because of fear of what people think, because of fear of looking bad, for example. Or maybe you know some of your athletes who have this, okay? Maybe some of your siblings, they might avoid challenges due to fear of failure. And then finally, the last question, let's think about this one. Do you fear how others will respond to you, or do you embrace challenges? Okay, and again, like the other questions, this may vary, okay? So some of these things can be situation specific. Maybe you're not worried about what people think of you in school or in education or in work, but you're worried about how they think of you in sport or a different environment. So it can be different, and it can vary. So does anybody have any questions or anything that they'd like to say about any of these before we move on? Okay, so we're now going to look at how you respond to success. So this is equally important. So when you succeed at something, whether it's a competition, whether it's something in life, do you celebrate it? Or do you celebrate it and then you get complacent about the next performance? Do you feel more motivated to continue? Or do you then feel pressure to be perfect and to do really, really well? Can anybody tell me their experience of responding to success? How do you deal with success? So maybe it's something to think about, and you can even just take notes and have a think about it as you go. So I sent around a questionnaire called the BISBAS model, and I'm going to talk you through this, okay? It's a little bit complicated, so we'll go through it slowly. So this is a model that measures how people respond to threats and rewards, okay? So if any of you got this form and filled it out, I'll go through it and explain it, okay? And so basically, the first one that we look at here is threat responsiveness, okay? So that talks about how people respond to threats. It's really about whether people hide from threats, okay? How they perceive threats, or whether they embrace threats, okay? So how we score them is 1 strongly agree and 4 strongly disagree. But 2 of the questions are reverse scored, okay? So if you get a low score for this, it means that you have high threat responsiveness, okay? So somebody with high threat responsiveness may avoid challenges, okay? They may tend to hide away from challenges, or they may get more worked up, more anxious, okay? So these might be some athletes or players who might respond in a way that they may be more shy, or maybe they might become aggressive, or they might become stressed when there's a perceived threat happening, okay? So, and also this is something, if you're a boccia coach, something for you to consider as well. So if there's a competition coming up and you feel under threat, okay, then you may be more anxious, or you may actually want to hide away from the perceived threat. So if we look at the first question here, if I think something unpleasant is going to happen, I usually get pretty worked up. So you can see here, if you get strongly agree, this is more of a high threat responsiveness, okay? I worry about making mistakes. But this is something that happens to people in performance. Some people worry more, some people worry less. So if you have 1 for this one, if it's strongly agree, you will be 1 for this one, okay? Maybe you're somewhere in the middle and that's okay too. So 2 or 3 is fine as well. The next one, criticism or scolding hurts me quite a bit. Okay, so how are you with this one? Maybe you know some athletes or some of your fellow teammates or who you train, some people who respond like this. So people who get quite hurt when they are, when there's some criticism, okay? And why this is useful is, as a coach, it's useful to know which athletes obviously respond to criticism in different ways so that you can change how you communicate with them. And I'm sure many of you are aware of that as well. So perhaps if somebody is more sensitive to criticism, they may get a lower score here, so they'd be on strongly agree, okay? And finally, I feel pretty worried or upset when I think or know somebody is angry at me. All right, so this could be, again, if we're talking about Boccia, if you think that maybe they think that the coach or their teammates or somebody else is upset that they're not playing so well, they may have higher levels of threat responsiveness, all right? And what this can do is it can lead people to not want to play as often, not want to take on challenges, to hide, to avoid a little bit more. All right, does anybody have any questions about those before I move on to the next sheet? Is anybody a bit lost? We have one comment in here, how to improve tactics of Boccia. So is that in relation to the previous slide, Raghav? Or this one? Okay, we'll move on from that. So we're going to go on to the next one. And let me just go here. So you can see that 2 of the topics here are reverse scored, okay? So in that case, you get 4 for strongly agree and 1 for strongly disagree, okay? So here, even if something bad is about to happen to me, I rarely experience nervousness, okay? And I feel worried when I think I've done poorly at something. That's 1 for strongly agree and then 4 for strongly disagree. And finally, I have very few fears compared to my friends. So this one is reverse scored, so it's 4 for strongly agree and 1 for strongly disagree. So basically, overall, if you get a lower score in the threat responsiveness, so for example, if you get a 7, that means that you perceive threats more, okay? And this may affect how much you take on challenges, how sensitive you are to things like criticism, if you get more stressed, more anxious. And this is something to be aware of with your players, with your teammates, with the people you work with as well. So if you notice that people may be avoiding taking part in something, they may be more stressed, more anxious, maybe it's that they're perceiving more threats. And that could be the reason for that behavior. So we'll move on from this a little bit and we'll talk about how we respond to threats. Okay, so let's look at this one here. So how do we respond to threats? So what does it mean when we talk about how we respond to threats? What can we do about it? Okay, so of course, if we're in a challenging, competitive environment, there are going to be threats, okay? So do we just avoid them altogether? Is that really what we do, or are there ways to deal with it? So as I mentioned earlier, if we get a lower score, it may mean that we avoid certain situations. So we may avoid competitions, we may avoid a certain approach, maybe we avoid speaking to someone. But a very high score means that we may embrace challenges, okay? We may really like adverse situations, and we might have lower levels of anxiety. So in a team or in a working environment, it can be good to have a mixture of people with these traits, and it's helpful to know who has which levels of each as well, so that you can support each other. So somebody who has high levels of anxiety might be supported by somebody who has lower levels of anxiety as well. So what could we do if we notice that we have lower scores? So what do we do if we have a high threat responsiveness? Okay, has anybody got any ideas of what you could do if you are somebody that tends to perceive threats a lot and avoid challenges and get quite anxious? Any tips or ideas? How could you help your teammates, your fellow athletes, if they might avoid challenges? They might avoid something a little bit more difficult. They might even avoid change. Peter?
I would probably just decompress the whole competitive aspect and any pressure environment which builds up out of that, and just sort of lead on a more playful route to get there rather than a competitive aspect which exposes them potentially also to other players who may be very competitive, because that competitiveness from that player, even though the athlete would be in their own bubble, if you want to put it that way, they will still perceive that competitiveness as a threat, which could further alienate them from partaking in sort of any activity, even with any other person, in whichever training environment you may have them in, or you may want to progress them into.
Good. And how would you do that, like as an example? So how would you make the environment more fun, as an example?
Well, I would just, as I said, take away all the competitive aspect, introduce activities which are tailored towards the interests and the personality of said player, cater it towards them rather than it being something that is out of their control, because often, of course, we also see that heightened competitive element being related to activities or situations that they can no longer control.
Okay, so I'm going to put this to the whole group. What if it was a high performance situation? How would we make it more playful if it was a high performance, if that's how the athletes perceived it, more of a high performance situation? How do we make this more playful? Any ideas? What could we do to make it?
Give them a choice as to what the coaching plan could include.
Yeah. So they have some autonomy. Yeah. Anything else? Scott.
I think it's important to create an environment where there's no judgment. So you want to create an atmosphere where there's nobody going to be worried about being judged, where there's no right or wrong answer. There's no such thing for effort. It's all about doing your best and not judging everything on the outcome.
So how do you create that environment as a coach then?
I think really it starts from how you conduct yourself from day one, but also by not tolerating those kind of behaviors from other members of the group. You want to make sure that you're treating everybody equally. You're not, chastising people in public for not reaching a certain target. You're basically encouraging them to do better next time, and it's all about learning and improving rather than trying to reach the standard.
Yeah. So enjoying the process rather than the outcome.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else got anything to add about making it more playful and less about the focus on the threat? Okay. So let's look at reward. Excuse me. So this part here is called reward responsiveness. It's about how we respond to rewards. Okay, so again, think about this with yourself. It'll be the easiest ways that you can relate to this with your own athletes as well. So these are the questions here. So when I get something I want, I feel excited and energized. Okay, so this one here will be 1, strongly agree, and then 4 is strongly disagree. When I'm doing well at something, I love to keep at it. Again, that would be 1, strongly agree, 4, strongly disagree. And again, you can have 2 or 3 in the middle. When good things happen to me, it affects me strongly. Again, 1, strongly agree, and 4 is strongly disagree. And then number 4, it would excite me to win a contest. So 1 is strongly agree, and then 4 is strongly disagree. And then finally, when I see an opportunity for something I like, I get excited right away. Okay, so maybe just have a think about the scores that you got for that. Okay, and just let it mull around in your head. Okay, and we'll talk through this a little bit more. So this is how we respond to rewards. So it's slightly the opposite of threats. Okay, now, so with the knowledge that we have, if you, for example, there was 5 questions there, and if, for example, we got a 5 in total, so the 5 questions, and then we got 5 strongly agrees, then perhaps we get a score of 5, okay? And the highest score would be 20, okay? Now, that would mean somebody with a score towards the higher end doesn't really respond to rewards so much, okay? Whereas somebody with a score around 5 really responds to rewards and really feels motivated by rewards, okay? So how do we use that knowledge, okay? What do we do if we're not motivated by rewards, okay? So just some suggestions I have here, and while you're thinking, you can see if you can think of your own suggestions. Maybe there's something that you already use as well. So if we don't really respond to rewards so well, can we find a bigger why? Okay, so a bigger reason to be motivated, and often people do have a bigger reason to be motivated. What's the reason we're going to competition? Why are we training? Why are we even giving the training? Okay, and see if you can find something that motivates you enough. Okay, has anybody got any other ideas? If you're not that motivated by rewards, if that's not the thing that keeps you going so much, what would keep you motivated to keep going, for example? I'll just go back a little bit and just show you the reward responsiveness again. So this is the reward responsiveness. And again, here, if you get this one, it's 1 strongly agree and 4 strongly disagree. And this one here, 1 strongly agree, 4 strongly disagree. And again, 1 strongly agree, 4 strongly disagree. And this one, 1 strongly agree, 4 strongly disagree. And the same for this one. Okay. So does anyone want to comment on that, or anyone have any questions about it? Okay. Oh, Scott, go for it.
Yeah, I guess I suppose that's a difficult one, because if people are not motivated by success, then they're probably are motivated by failure, and perhaps that's tricky because it leads to adverse reactions. You know, if you're always motivated by fear, it's hard to maybe coach in that regard. I mean, for myself, I was mainly motivated just by winning, not anything that comes with success. I just enjoyed competing and trying to win. But I guess the actual stuff that comes around with success, I was less motivated by. But I think for other people, it's maybe trying to find things outside of that. So maybe the social aspects, the health benefits they get, and various things like that. Perhaps it's using those things to motivate people.
Yeah, it is a difficult question. And yeah, you have a good point there. Some people are motivated by the fear of failure. So it's not even the success so much or the rewards, it's actually the fear of failure and or looking bad. So okay, so we're moving on to drive. So this is more related to motivation. Okay. And I'm sure some of you can relate to this. Some people can score quite highly. So what a high score on the BAS drive would be a 4. Okay, so that would be somebody who's highly motivated, okay, or highly driven, for example. And then a lower score as such would be 16. Okay, so for example, when I want something, I usually go all out and get it. Okay, I go out of my way to get things I want. If I see a chance to get something I want, I move on it right away. Whoops. Okay. And when I go after something, I use a no holds barred approach. Okay. So I'm sure maybe some of you can relate to this. Maybe you know people who have this type of drive. Maybe you know athletes that you look up to who have this type of strong drive. Okay. And it can be really, really helpful when people really want to achieve and they have this really strong drive. It can be the motivator that can push an athlete through who may not even have the same skill level as another athlete. Okay, this drive is something that many really elite athletes have at world-class level, and they may not have the same level of skill, the same training that other athletes, but they have this drive that gets them through. So it is definitely a driver, or it is something that helps people to perform. So just as a reminder, if you have done this at home yourself, if you get a score of 4, for example, that means you have a high drive, for example, to get what you want, and then a score of 16 will be a lower drive. Okay. Now, if you have the lower drive, this is something to be a little bit mindful of and go, oh yeah, so maybe that's why I'm not achieving the goals in this particular area, because my drive isn't as strong. So what can I do about that? Okay. So before we move on, I'd like you to think about that. So if you have a lower drive towards maybe the 16 level, okay, in anything, any area of your life that you're working on, what could you do to try and improve that? Is there anything that you can do? Again, I know it's a tricky question, but give it a go. So if you're not that motivated, or if somebody is not as motivated to get the thing, to succeed, is there anything you can do? Give it a go, someone. You might get it right. Kathy.
Yeah, I think debriefing with other athletes and seeing drive from them sometimes sparks athlete drive in certain areas. I think getting to the why of your, which is hard to do, but the why a drive in a certain area is not as high as others. And reevaluating your goals from time to time, I think, is important. That introspective piece of it as to why it's not as high.
Lovely, yeah, good. So you can see why somebody's not as motivated and look at the reason behind it. Maybe there is a high threat responsiveness as well. Yeah, very good. And like Kathy said as well, it's nice to be able to do something like this as a group as well. So people can get motivated by other people that are around them too, and maybe figure out what different people's reasons are for doing something. Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that one? Okay. So as I was saying, so if you have a lower score for drive, then it means that you're really motivated to want to achieve that particular goal. And then a higher score means less motivation for that particular goal. And again, this can obviously change with different goals. Okay, so you may have high drive to achieve in a sport, maybe less drive to achieve in some other task, for example, cooking at home or something. Okay. And what do we do? How do we help ourselves? Maybe working on the why again. Look to our players and our teammates for motivation. Look at the reasons behind that as well. Okay. So people have many different reasons for getting involved in sports. And sometimes people have to reevaluate that as well. So it could be entertainment. I'm sure some of you know athletes that are more than just athletes. Okay. They get involved in other projects. They get involved in entertainment, and they can be, role models for people, teaching them about different things, character building, and these are huge areas of sport as well. Whether you're a coach or whether you're on management or team player or anything. So character building and social interaction, these are essential for our health, our overall daily health as well. So this can be part of the why and the driver. And of course, again, it's career building. So I'm sure most of you know how beneficial it is to be involved in sport for career building. So those are just some ideas, but maybe you've got some more ideas around in your head that you can think of, and we can share these towards the end as well if you want, or feel free to input when you want to. Okay, so the next part is fun seeking or sensation seeking. Okay, so again, this is scored with 1 strongly agree and 4 strongly disagree. Okay, so if you have a lower score, it means that you have a high level of sensation seeking. Okay, and if you have a higher score, for example, 16, a lower level of sensation seeking and fun. So this is an interesting one when you think about sport and motivation. So the first one, I will often do things for no other reason than that they might be fun. And then the second one, I crave excitement and new sensations. And then I'm always willing to try something new if I think it will be fun. And 4, I often act on the spur of the moment. Okay, so let's think about these. How do you think somebody who has a score of 4, for example, so they are high sensation seeking, how could that impact their performance in sport? Could it impact it in a positive way or a negative way, or both? Okay, let's see. Kathy.
Yeah, this is an interesting one for me because I'm more analytical, so I'm not as fun seeking, but I have athletes that, will try shots that are probably not a high percentage, but at the time, they get drive from it. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. I think, it's both, right? It's a double-edged sword on, risk reward, right? And they may not be thinking about it as much as I am, about the risk reward. And I want to encourage that to an extent. But it's a hard one to coach, right? When they're doing things more for excitement than maybe thinking through analytically about it. Yeah.
Interesting. So if you had somebody who wasn't thinking things through analytically, how could you help them?
I think put them in situations where they're calling their shots in practices and things and really working through that out loud is certainly helpful in terms of that, and also rewarding risk at times, right? Not being the coach that doesn't, that says, well, that's just too risky all the time. You know what I mean? There's times when risk is important, Yeah.
Super. Peter, did you want to add something?
Well, I was in effect, it's going to say the same, of course, that, you know, if they're fun seeking, there is just that element of course, enjoying the game, enjoying participating, enjoying competing. But of course, there comes the draw side, which is then perhaps may, as Dr. Brinker said, not take it, although I think at least implication of, you know, not thinking it through, not being focused on the technicality. And it can, as I've seen with even in my own practice, it can then veer off into the carelessness factor, which of course, as a precision sport, we try and avoid that. So there's a balance, I suppose, into finding that. And I think one way of which I've managed to do that quite successfully is make the technical process a fun achievement to unlock, to, you know, turn it. I mean, Boccia is a game, but of course to further gamify the high performance process so that it becomes a fun seeking challenge to execute what we are what we're basically recommending for them to master.
Good. If we think about this, what about if you had a player that, you know, or maybe some of you guys know some players that some are more sensation seeking and others are less sensation seeking. How could they benefit from each other?
Well, I love this in pair play or team play where you have that balance, right? So there's some that'll say, well, let's think about this, you know, whereas others are just like, this is the shot we should make, you know. So and being light and joking in practice with these kinds of things, and really you know, allowing each other to, allowing those fun seeking athletes that want to try a shot, giving them permission particularly to do it in those moments when there's nothing on the line, right? You know, and celebrating those. I think we don't celebrate it enough on court when athletes take those risks that are important to take sometimes.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, so celebrating the fun and celebrating the, you know, acting on the spur of the moment as well. Okay, super. So we're going to talk about practical ways to deal with failures, and I'm sure many of you know this already, but I think it's important to just be aware of this as well, because usually when the failures happen, we need to start to think about our tools, and it's good to have these in on the top of our mind. So failure is a part of the process of challenge. So we, you know, when we take on challenges, we're deciding to embrace failure as well. Okay, so if we're trying something new, there's going to be a failure at some point, and it means that we're learning. Okay, it can be hard to accept as well. And so then it's important to allow yourself to process emotions around failure. So, and allow yourself to look at your thought process. Something I would encourage, you know, something I would encourage coaches and athletes to do is to write their thoughts down around failures or around competitions. So it can be even in the morning time beforehand or after trainings. That kind of thing can be really, really useful so that people aren't responding in a stressful way or getting demotivated. Okay, so even just 10 to 15 minutes writing down pre or post competition to try and work out some distorted thinking and see what the thought process is. So distorted thinking, if anybody hasn't come across this word before, it's looking at thoughts that are not helpful. Okay, so for example, somebody might have a thought that is, I missed that shot, that means I'm terrible. Okay, or that means I'm not going to do good at all, or that means that the whole team is going to be upset with me. Okay, so that's an example of distorted thinking, and it's something that we need to look at and be aware of. Okay, we don't have to control this, but just to be aware of our tendency to think in distorted ways. So what is thinking distortion? So for example, catastrophizing. So I'm sure many of you have heard of this before. So people thinking that the worst is going to happen. As an example, when you know, when we had a pandemic, everybody went and bought toilet paper and bread. Okay. So I don't know why, but that's how we are as humans. So everybody thought that there was going to be no more bread and toilet paper for some reason. So, but that was an example of catastrophizing. And also human behavior, people's social learning and copying each other too. So that's part of the reason why that happened. And then all or nothing thinking. So people can go from one side to another. Okay, it has to be this way. It has to be win at all costs, or it has to be a complete failure. For example, there's no point in doing anything, or I must give 100%. Okay, so maybe an athlete one day isn't feeling so well, and they think, well, there's no point in me going. I don't feel 100%. No, actually, maybe 90% is okay. You know, because if we give 100% all the time, then we end up being burnt out. Okay, so emotional reasoning. So this is the example I gave earlier. So I feel this way, so it must be true. I feel bad, therefore I must be bad, for example. Okay. And then magnification of the positive, of the negative, and of the positive. Okay, so, oh, everything was terrible. I forgot my gear. I couldn't get parking. The lights were too bright. So when we journal, we get to look at that thought process. Maybe as a coach, we can look at these thought processes ourselves, and it helps us to just become aware. Okay, we don't have to give ourselves a hard time about it, but just become aware of our thought process. And also minimization of the positive. Okay, so maybe a lot of really, really good things happened. Okay, maybe players were really happy, they had a good time, they had fun, everything went smoothly. Maybe there was no win, but maybe it was positive in so many other aspects. And it's really important to have a balanced view of things, okay, so that people are not giving themselves a hard time and ultimately getting demotivated. So is anybody familiar with these? And I'm sure many of you are, but does anybody have any questions about these cognitive distortions? Peter?
Yes, actually, well, I mean, yeah, I've made experiences with most of them, but one thing that I find, because you did briefly touch on that, or at least I think so, was also over magnification of the positive in situations which require some critical analysis. And I find that a very interesting one, because, you know, as people in performance, we're of course positive and self-confident in the most ideal situations, but then there's also that cognitive distortion which doesn't allow for any critical reflection of the situation.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's so that is a really good point. So it's important. Okay, so just as an example, imagine as a team, if there's a tendency to do that. So for example, just focus on the positive. What's a way to approach that as a team, or even as a player? Anybody? So there's a tendency to only focus on the positive and not look at the negative, to avoid looking at the things that need to be looked at. How could you approach that as a team? Peter, go for it.
Well, I would just try to, in a careful manner, of course, because as we are, you know, in the sports, we're dealing with emotions, with people, but just try and I would say critically, but softly scratch the surface to see what is, if there is anything that they perceive still could have gone better without directly criticizing any performance.
Yeah, so a gentle. So is there, you know, if there's one thing that could be improved today, you know,
definitely not from a sort of like taking the whole experience and then trying to throw a cast on it, but just in a soft way and a controlled way, say, what is one thing, despite this positive experience for yourself or for us as a group, what could still have gone better?
Yeah, lovely. Kathy?
Yeah, I was going to say similar stuff. Just we have set open-ended questions that we'll ask the entire team to try to get at some of those critical elements that we could do better with. and allow it and use the word we a lot and not
Yeah,
yeah.
not personalizing it too much. Good. Okay. Oops, Scott, do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add. I think it's sometimes about starting small. So like perhaps maybe picking something that's quite obvious that wasn't that it could have been better. Maybe something that's not even related to performance, and then you kind of work your way up to it. So it's maybe about reminding people that generally, things went well, and you're quite good at what you're trying to achieve. But also, there's ways in which it could be even better. So you're just trying to can start slowly and slowly work up to more critical.
So that's about your language. So it's about the words you use. So things went well. I like that approach. So things went well, and they could be even better. So that's more about how you sell it. It's not the word I really want to use, but it's about the language you use, which is a lovely approach as well. Okay, so let's look at more cognitive distortions. So jumping to conclusions. What kind of conclusions could be jumped to in performance? Peter.
One thing that I mean, especially Boccia related, that I hear too is like, oh, my physical build is nothing like the other athletes. I feel like that's putting me at a disadvantage from the onset, not even getting there. I feel disadvantaged. And I think it also, of course, ebbs and floods into other areas as well, of course, on this list, especially on this slide.
Yeah. And that if you go back to what we talked about earlier about drive, if somebody is feeling like that, you could actually remind them about drive. So, look at their drive to do well and see if they do feel like they're going to win at all costs, or they want to win at all costs, and how is that affecting them too. So fortune telling. So fortune telling is somebody saying, okay, we're definitely going to lose this, or we're definitely going to win this, no matter what. I know how it's going to go. And then we have mind reading. So this is believing we know what others are thinking. Okay. So we don't know what anyone is thinking, even though sometimes we think we do. So, I know he's annoyed at me because of X or Y. Okay. But we don't know that. We don't always know what people are thinking. They could just be not feeling great anyway. Self-blaming. So again, people can sometimes take things very personally, especially if they've got very high standards for themselves. Okay. I'm sure many of you know as well from yourselves, maybe you are hard on yourselves. Okay. If you don't do things really well, maybe you blame yourselves too much. Okay. Or the other extreme, you might blame others as well. Okay. So that can happen too. So blaming ourselves too much or blaming others without looking at our part as well. So let's see. Okay. So let's move on. Does anyone have any questions about those ones? Peter.
I would just probably say something to the other blaming part, which I think is actually quite a dangerous one to do, because it, of course, goes into a personal level. And as we know, especially at, even local or national level, it's a smaller group. So there is a lot of chances for persons, coaches, etc., to become somewhat offended. So I always try and, especially if there's been a situation where I perceive the concerned athletes have been basically disappointed, is I always encourage to reflect on it before we go outwards with, especially any harsh criticism towards what they perceive, towards others that they perceive are the reason being, because as we all know, and I think this is just generally, some good advice, is that once something has been said, it can be very difficult to retract that and to mend the emotions that have then been affected by that.
Yeah, it can't be unsaid. It's very hard. Yeah.
Yes.
Very, very difficult. Okay, so filtering out the positive. So again, this is kind of similar to something we talked about earlier. So magnification of the negative. Then we have overgeneralization. So it's always this way. Those people are always like that. It never happens for me. And I'm sure, you know, if you're interested in other sports, you know, people will generalize about certain players, certain referees. They're always like this. This ref was always like that. Okay, so you'll hear that. And also the blaming will come in there as well. So that ref is always like that, you know. And then we have labeling. I'm just an incapable person. Okay, people do put labels on themselves. Okay, they can be quite harsh on themselves as well. All right, and then shoulds or musts. These ones are ones to watch out for. Okay, it's human nature to tend to use these a lot, but they tend to put a lot of pressure on people. Okay, as a little exercise, you can keep repeating to yourself, I should do this, I should do this, I should do this. Notice what it does to your body. Okay, or I must do this, I must do this, I must do this. So that kind of language, I should, I have to, that kind of thing, it does put pressure on people. So it's about noticing what it does to the body, and you can change should to I could. Okay, I could do the training like this. Okay, it's not should, because should puts us under a lot of pressure, or can put us under a lot of pressure. Okay, so some of you might have read the book Flow by, I often get this name wrong, Csikszentmihalyi. Mihaly anyway. He wrote this book. And has anybody read it? Or does anybody like it? Flow? No? Okay, it's quite interesting, but generally the whole idea behind the research. You know it, Anita? Very good.
I know. Yes, I read it.
Oh, very good, very good. Okay, what did you like about it?
The whole Csikszentmihalyi is a Hungarian, so I'm a Hungarian. It was easy to read anyway. So yeah, the whole process, and I think this is the target that we need to achieve during the sessions and the trainings. This flow, but the athletes need to achieve, and when they get it, also raise their confidence in themselves.
Yeah. So if some of you take part in other sports, you'll know, depending on your personality, sometimes you may set a challenge too high, and you may have experienced anxiety and potential choking behavior, or too low, and you know, if you like a challenge, make it apathy, you're not as interested. Okay, so even in your daily life, okay, so if you're feeling not challenged enough in work, for example, or in your studies, you may have a lack of motivation. Okay, so it's good to have the optimal level of challenge, okay, where it's not too high, not too low, but you feel just adequately challenged. Okay, and this, you kind of get a sweet spot where people can get into an area of flow, and they can perform well in their sport as well. And so there's many factors that are involved in flow as well that can create this flow. But generally, if you can relate it to challenge, so having just an adequate level of challenge where people can perform well. But it's a good book if you like to read it. And then does somebody want to comment on something there? No? Just saw somebody unmuted. Okay, so the next part we have is goal setting. So I'm sure most of you do set goals with your players, whether it's loosely or more detailed. There's a piece of research which I really like about goal setting, and this research is recent, quite recent, okay, and it talks about the most important part of setting goals is actually just setting the goals. So I know some of you may have come across this SMARTer approach, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. But actually, the most important part is to just really create a vision, okay? Create a vision that people can work towards, all right? Sometimes if we make it too specific, too detailed, it can create that anxiety as well. Whereas this research has shown that just the process of setting goals, setting a vision, creates some hope and helps people to have that motivation as well. So that's something to think about too. Any questions on goal setting? Scott, go for it.
Yeah, no, I just find that the study that you mentioned quite interesting. It's a particular area where, for me as an athlete, I find goal setting quite challenging because I was always confused by the prospect of setting a goal. For instance, if you aim for perhaps to maybe make the semi-final of a competition, well, in my head, I just want to aim for winning competitions. It was, even if the chance of that was quite slim, it just seemed strange to be, lowering what you were trying to aim for. You always aim for the very best, but then obviously as a coach, trying to do that for my own athletes, it's quite interesting. So I kind of quite like the idea that the important bit's about the actual setting of the goal rather than making sure it's absolutely accurate and achievable. It's almost like if you hit that target but there's still more to go, does that mean you just kind of give up in your head because you've hit your target? But also if you hit it too high, are you just making it where people are afraid to try and achieve it? So I think that's quite interesting that the research is maybe moving towards looking at it's actually just about trying to frame something to aim for rather than making sure it's absolutely accurate.
Yeah. That's it, exactly. So it creates some kind of a cognitive overload for people, or it can create a cognitive overload where it's a level of anxiety if they're not meeting these goals. But the importance is just to have a vision, and then people know what they're working towards. And it could be even just revising that, monthly as well, to look at it. So yeah, if you want to read that research, I'll show the references at the end as well. It's interesting. So Peter, did you want to add something there?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say basically that, having an overall goal also helps in times of when you perhaps do not achieve a lower, so a sort of more broken down goal, or even after defeat, because after defeat, we of course often turn inwards and then ask ourselves, why did we commit ourselves to this? Was it worth it? But then you realize that this is just one of many steps towards that overall goal. And I mean, of course, depending on how big the goal is, it is just a natural part of progression. So it helps keep perspective on the overall mission, the overall thing and it's different for everyone. For some, it's, just performing a technical shot. For others, it's getting to the Paralympic Games. For others, it's just getting out of the house and enjoying being around others. So it's just really useful in terms of keeping motivation up. And in a sense, in a broader sense, it also is very tied towards quality of life and how we perceive that.
Yeah. Super. So let's just check our time here. Okay, so I have a question here in the chat: how to achieve long-term goals. So long-term goals are really about smaller goals. So it's about breaking it down. So for example, if you have a long-term goal for 5 years' time, it's about thinking about what will I achieve this year, this month to work towards that goal. So we don't lose sight of it as well. Okay, so having a good support system. Now, this is so important in sport. It's hugely important. It's important for everyone. It's the reason why we have these types of workshops for coaches. Coaches need a lot of support. You can't coach alone, okay? You know that. And also you can't play alone, no matter what sport you play. Okay, so it's really important to belong, okay? And that's why people take part in sport. It's a human need. And having a really good support system is optimal, okay? So like I gave an example earlier of how everyone went and bought bread and toilet paper when we had a pandemic, that was social learning, okay? Because one of the reasons was because of panic, okay? It was catastrophizing, thinking the worst. The other one was social learning. So people saw other people doing it and then they copy them, okay? So So we need to have good people around us that we can learn from. And this is why maybe having conversations with our teammates about what motivates them, what drives them, can be useful as well. Okay, so what drives you to come to training every day? Why are you here? What do you hope to achieve? And that can be a really good conversation to have. And maybe everyone has a different reason why, a different drive. Okay, and that can build the morale. So have a think about it. Think about your support system. Are you surrounding yourself with people that want you to succeed? Okay, so, and if you're not, how can you make that better for yourself? Are there ways that you can create a better support system in the area that you live? And if not in the area that you live, do you need to reach out to people in other countries as well? Sometimes you really need to do that in sport. Okay, you've got to reach out to people who are in different countries and who can help you as well in the sport. Okay, so have a think about your support systems and whether they are helping you, or if you can build the support system that you have within your own sport a little bit more. Okay, so self-care is something that I'm sure most of you have heard a lot about, and these are really, really important. No matter how often you hear them, they're still important, and there's still areas that we can neglect. Whoops, I've gone forward. Let me just go back one. So there we go. Okay, so sleeping well, massively important. If you're interested in sleep and the benefits of sleep, there's a lot of research on this. It's hugely important in relation to performance and accuracy and decision making as well in sport. Okay, so drinking water, yeah, for energy and hydration, eating healthily, surrounding yourself with people who want you to succeed. Has anybody got any other ideas for self-care? What else can we do for self-care? Peter?
I would say to do things that you enjoy, which of course bring you gratification. If it's, for example, going to the movies, or if it's just sitting indoors watching Netflix with a tub of ice cream. There's of course lots of I guess I wouldn't say stigmatization, but lots of like, oh, we should be doing that. But if that's what makes you happy, and of course also if it doesn't harm anyone else, then it's totally worthwhile pursuing that, because that is also self-care, which, if denied for long periods, does actually cause quite a lot of I don't know how to formulate it, but it just doesn't do you any good as a human.
Yeah, super. Michaela?
Yeah, definitely. I found very useful breathing exercises, and also actually, because I also experienced whatever it was, elite athletes or the athletes which playing for fun. I also reminded them to focus on themselves better than to be focused on external things. So I think what you can do more for yourself, I always remind my athletes to put attention. It's because if you lose attention, you lose everything. So I always telling them, try to refocus. Whatever, if you're scared during the match, if you have fear, if you think that the others are more better than you for whatever reason, they have better equipment, they have better physical profile. I always tell in my athletes, you have everything what you need. You have everything what you need. You don't need to be so much focused for external things, and it really, really helped to my athletes, I think. So that's what you can do. I think that's what you can do for yourself, to stay focused on yourself and not others.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, so it's about centering and calming as well, and yeah, not being too concerned with threats as well. So that brings us back to that idea of people being threatened as well. So you can practice breathing to help with that. So, all right, so we're just gonna.
Oops.
Oh,
I wanted to say something. Sorry.
yeah, go for it.
One thing that I also tell athletes, especially when they're out there competing, you know, traveling the world, is to, whilst of course it's a stressful environment, also to just take a moment, pause, and just experience the experience, take it on board and enjoy it, because this is of course, you know, a bit of a reward, you know, being able to compete and being able to play the game that you love. And yeah, because I see especially lots of younger athletes, they get so caught up wanting to be the best that they forget the experience around them. And I have some of my best memories, of course, from competing internationally with my athletes. So therefore, I just encourage, especially the young ones, to do that as well. And I think also from a coaching perspective, because this is what I'm currently going through with building up the sport in Jamaica, is I'm focused on, of course, the end goals of, you know, sending athletes, you know, who wish to compete. But I also have to sometimes just center myself, remind myself what's actually happening, you know, introducing the sport, getting structures, getting public awareness is also something that should be enjoyed, because as I told my athletes, and what we're all doing is history in the making. So just to take that time to reflect in the here and now and to appreciate it.
Yeah, and enjoy the process.
Definitely.
Very good. Okay, so just to finish up, can you just maybe reflect and think about 3 things that you can take away from the workshop? And maybe you can jot them down, or maybe there's more that you liked or enjoyed. And think about how you can support yourself and your players. And then, is there anything else that you would like to add to this that we haven't mentioned? Does anybody have anything that they thought, oh, I think that would be good to help people? Scott?
I think the only thing I would add is probably when you were talking earlier about the distortions, and I think it's important to say that probably from that perspective, I would say that anyone that is involved in competing and tells you that they don't have those thoughts, I would say is probably lying. It's a normal part of, you know, being involved in competition. But the idea is, it's not so much about not having them, it's the idea of being able to silence them or send them away. So it's that you're able to hear them, but turn the volume on them. And I think that's a really important part of it. And there's loads of different ways that you can manage to do that.
Yeah, it's a good point. So it's about being aware of them and accepting them, but we don't have to, you know, I want to get rid of this part of myself. No, everybody has cognitive distortions. So just about accepting them and being aware of them.